Adventure. It's a word you hear quite a bit. Social media is chock full of posts about people going somewhere new and discovering something that they haven't seen before. In doing so, their layers of perceived mental imagery are replaced with memories that are built through tangible interactions with a new environment. Therefore, the individual perception is transformed through experience. The places you adventure to are probably how they've been for quite some time, but to you, they feel so incredibly new, as if you've uncovered something that no one else knows about. And even simply returning to a place years later to see how it's changed can feel like an adventure in its own right. In 2023, I've had a handful of experiences that have felt like adventuring. I visited Cleveland for the first time, appreciating both of the area's well-known Hall of Fames while getting a glimpse of the city's skyscrapers and layout. I took a trip to Florida to visit family and checked out some new shops and parks in the process. And I returned to an old family cabin to reconnect with nature and to just unplug for a little while. Whether it was the man-made urban jungle of Cleveland, the packed beaches of Anna Marie Island, or the towering maple trees of a quiet forest, I was having moments of pure adventure. New locations brought new memories, and returning to settings where previous memories had been made electrified me. It jolted me out of the slump that comes from driving around hometown USA day in and day out. Of course, most of those days at home involve playing video games, and well, that's not a bad thing either. Recently, I've been enjoying a lot of action-adventure games. It's a genre that is pretty broad, housing a multitude of games with diverse settings, stories, and gameplay. Really, no matter who you are, if you like video games at all, it's a genre where you'll find something to enjoy. But it's rare to find a game that mirrors that feeling of adventure that we derive from exploring new places in our real world. 6 years ago, we got one such game. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. And while the gaming world gushed, I personally did not. I tried so hard to connect with the game, but I just couldn't. I forced myself through it, and as a result, I have very few memories of my time with it. And so, going into Tears of the Kingdom, I was pretty skeptical. In many ways, it looked like a 1.5 version of that legendary launch title. But I remained optimistic to try it, in part to see if my gaming interests have evolved or remained stagnant over the last few years, but also because, well, it's a big game and I want people to watch my videos. And now as I sit here, poised to write this reflection piece on my over 60 hours with this sequel, I'm delighted to say that I've garnered a whole new appreciation for this style of game. And it's because I embrace this title as an adventure. Not a thing to be conquered and beaten, but instead an opportunity to discover something new. And when you go in with that mindset, you'll find yourself an incredibly gripping experience, and it's called the thrill of adventure. I don't know about you, but when I play games, I tend to be the guy who chases the credit roll. I have a hard time deviating from quest objectives for things like customization, base building, or just exploring for the sake of exploring. Free time is limited, and when I sit down to play something, I want to feel like I've made progress towards finishing the game each time the console's turned off. Approaching a game like Tears of the Kingdom in this way will yield a disappointing experience, much how it did for me in Breath of the Wild 6 years ago. A curiosity about what's out there is needed to truly enjoy this game to the fullest, and so I went in with that mindset. And let me tell you, it transforms your perspective of the title and allows you to appreciate the care, detail, and love that went into making it. By tapping into that adventurous side, you come to see just how much Hyrule has to offer. You, as Link, are but a small dot in a massive world, where life goes on throughout, regardless of where your 2 feet are standing. This world engulfs you, quite literally in some instances. And that's the first part of creating that realistic sense of adventure. You need somewhere to explore, and boy does Hyrule deliver. Whether it's the grassy plains of central Hyrule, the arduous and snowy Hebra mountain range, the deep jungles of Faerun, the oppressive Gerudo Desert, or anywhere else for that matter, Hyrule will constantly push and pull you around. When you see something in the distance, you're pulled to it, but along the way, you'll be pushed back by unbearable weather conditions, or the uneven lay of the land, and of course things like the monsters comprising the Demon King's army. And in this way, this push and pull, it makes you realize just how small Link is compared to the world around him. Through perseverance, you can carve a path through this world, but doing so will require you to adopt similar strategies to if you were a survivalist in the woods. If you're out there and the weather doesn't look good, well, you better wear the correct clothing. You're getting low on energy? Well, hunt some game and cook up a meal. You need to get somewhere? Push your endurance to the limit, but not too far, or you may just fall. You're rarely gifted anything in Hyrule. You must earn it by taking it, by pushing back against the unrelenting forces of nature, whether they're as vicious as a storm or as steady and strong as a tall mountain. And when the small moments of victory come, you feel that sense of accomplishment. Climbing a tall mountain, crossing a dangerous river, helping someone in need, and finding something new makes you feel like you've really done something, because the struggle to overcome the obstacles that were in the way to get there are real. Link is just a guy, susceptible to nature's wrath like anyone else, so when you overcome that pushback, you feel rewarded. And then it's off to the next adventure because you've just spotted something else in the distance, a higher mountain to climb, a shrine to conquer, or a town to learn of. A new cycle of push and pull begins without you ever really registering it consciously. It's brilliant. And that's a testament to the development team. Moments of discovery feel genuine, but you're nudged subtly into them by the developer's unseen hand. A careful understanding of the lay of the land allowed the developers to place things in their world with purpose. What feels like coincidental happenstance to you is actually a carefully crafted experience that the team made without leaving much of a trail of evidence. Check this out. Recently, I reviewed Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I praised its exploration. And while I stand by that, it's certainly an experience where you can feel yourself being pulled by the arm. Here, not so much. And that's absolutely critical in delivering the player that sense of adventure, because a guided tour never hits as hard as stumbling into something on your own. It allows for that feeling of pushing onward, to venture somewhere new, giving you the freedom to decide if you should be there or not. I'd wager that 2/3 of my experience with Tears of the Kingdom was just this, me seeing something and deciding to go check it out. And that's a deeply personal experience, as it will be for anyone who plays and enjoys this game. If I played all my recorded footage in a row for you, you as a viewer would just see a character walking through some grass or climbing up a rock face for a lot of the time, and you might think, what's so special about that? But it's the purpose behind that movement derived from me, the player, that gives it meaning. Every tilt forward of that analog stick is a decision, propelling me forward to reach the goal that I've just set. And that alone is very powerful. I'm discovering Hyrule on my terms. There are quest markers, but most of what you'll find will be done for yourself. However that takes shape, and it's a beautiful thing. This is what leads to storytelling and why this game is so fun to talk to others about. What you uncover may go completely unnoticed by your friends who are also enjoying the game. You can meet up and swap stories about Tears of the Kingdom that sound eerily similar to adventures you might have out in the real world, or at least the spirit behind those tales. I'll never forget just walking around Hyrule in the opening hours and being attacked by a tree for the first time. Like, what the hell? These things are mobile? Or how about the time I stumbled into a random fortune-telling chicken that was actually a Yiga clan ambush? Or even something as simple as building a makeshift car for the first time and riding around Hyrule. These are events that other players are sure to have experienced too, but the details of those moments will be different for each, which says a lot about how dynamic and divergent the gameplay on offer here really is. And there will be plenty of moments that you experience that will go undiscovered by others, and vice versa. And I think that's indicative of a special game, where you take action on your terms. It isn't only natural beauty and danger that you'll uncover though, as there's plenty of small towns and villages returning from Breath of the Wild. Often, these places, along with stables, will house tons of side quests that will push you towards other cool things in the world, such as a village that's been taken over by bokoblin pirates, or a town that's undergoing some mayoral changes. The most iconic cities, though, belong to the other races of the people in Hyrule: the Rito, the Zora, the Gorons, and the Gerudo. Each of these are amazing showcases of the incredible world and character building this team has become known for. Diverse in their looks and culture makes each of them feel unique, and they're a pleasure whether you're uncovering them for the first time or are a returning face. Seeing how Hyrule's land and its people have changed since the events of Breath of the Wild will be one of the greatest treats for those returning to this take on such an iconic world. Of course, Hyrule is more than just this ground level, which, don't let me undersell it, it's already massive. In the pre-release trailers, we learned of the Sky Islands, massive bits of land always just levitating above. By launching from Skyview Towers or cleverly reversing the movement of a fallen fragment, we can reach these islands and uncover more. There are quite a few of them to be discovered, but they ended up being sort of a disappointment. I expected there to be more of them, and for them also to be a little bit bigger. They aren't bad, as they still contain their own shrines, puzzles, unique materials, and even treasure maps, but for as prominent as they were in the marketing, I felt I didn't spend much time with them. Exploring Hyrule's ground level was always more compelling because of the ease of access. It isn't hard to reach Sky Islands, but the rewards they offered were often not enticing enough to take the extra steps to reach them. That's my personal take, but for many, they will serve as a sufficient addition. Of course, what they didn't tell us is that underneath Hyrule lurks a dark secret. A big dark secret. That's right, falling down these chasms all over the map will lead you into the deep, dark depths, devoid of almost all light. Down here is a second Hyrule to explore, with tougher enemies, more abrasive obstacles, and a sense of dread that almost never vanishes, even as you make your way through it. To be clear, they didn't copy and paste the world map and just bump it down a layer, but instead, they thoughtfully recreated what Hyrule might look like in a world where Ganondorf has already won. It's inspired by what's above without just rehashing it, and it is incredible. I mean, they've essentially took the Breath of the Wild map and made it 2.5 times bigger with the depths and the Sky Islands. So you thought the prequel was a big game? Well, get a load of this. On a gameplay level, the depths are essentially a massive mid to end game area where that pushback from nature will go from a fast flowing river to a full-on tsunami. Gloom is everywhere down here. It's a substance that corrodes anything it touches, and when you come in contact with it, either through the club of an enemy or by stepping into a pool of it, your max health will be temporarily nerfed. And when darkness engulfs it all, every step could be your last. Luckily, there's light roots sprinkled all throughout. Interacting with one repels the darkness, but only in a small portion of the very large map. But finding one feels like finding a bonfire in Dark Souls. It's a safe haven to relax for a bit before pushing out again to stumble through more darkness. It's oppressive even if you're stocked up on plenty of glow bulbs that can light up a small bit of the area. Overcoming this beast of a rotten land is extremely satisfying, as carving away at the darkness bit by bit feels like winning a fight with a bear while only using the blade of a knife. The depths are like falling through a hole in earth and ending up in hell. It's wild. It's incredible that they even pulled it off. And so I don't think I've ever encountered a game that does verticality this well, outside of, well, again, the original Dark Souls. I've been looking for a contemporary to challenge that title for years, and finally I found one with Tears of the Kingdom. Diving off of a high mountain and gliding is always satisfying, but when you can fall for so long, through so many different layers, it creates an unparalleled sense of verticality. It's like nothing I've ever experienced in a game before. It only leads to even more adventures for you to have if you so choose. And that's an important note. Adventures must end at some point. And whenever you reach that point where you've had your fill, you're free to push onward with just the main story. Whether it takes you 2, 20, or 200 hours to get your fill of exploration, you're always free to take things at your pace. And putting that choice in players' hands is extremely admirable. Now that's a bit on how the world pushes down on you, both in its scale and with its obstacles. But while Link is tiny, he isn't helpless. This is a sandbox game after all, meaning you have a whole host of tools to fight back with, so let's look at those. The opening hours take Link above the clouds to the biggest collection of sky islands. This airborne Great Plateau is where you'll begin to unlock the 4 main abilities offered for this adventure. They include Ultra Hand, Recall, Ascend, and Fuse. There is another ability that you unlock later called Auto Build, but I didn't experiment with it too much. Now, Recall and Ascend are pretty simple to understand. Using Recall on an object will force it to backtrack its trajectory, which is super useful in shrines and while trying to reach Sky Islands. Ascend, on the other hand, allows you to break through any roof within range and come out on top of it. Again, it's super useful in some shrines, but more so in the vast number of caves dotting Hyrule's landscape. It's like a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card, and it's great. If you thought Breath of the Wild sandbox had potential for comic mischief, you'll be blown away by the Fuse ability here in Tears. Any environmental object that can be lifted using Ultra Hand can also be attached to any weapon or shield, while others can be attached to arrows too. And let me tell you, the possibilities here are endless. The first time I fused a beehive with a stick, I knew they were onto something. Running after enemies, forcing my bee army to swarm them into submission was instantly a good time. And the game never pushes you to make such a device. It gives you the tools and trust that you'll discern for yourself what is practical, useless, and just plain funny through experimentation. Each material you collect and object in the environment has an effect depending on if you fuse it to a sword, shield, or arrow. For example, fusing an eyeball to an arrow will give it a homing quality, while putting a ruby on a shield will provide an additional heat source that's necessary in the colder mountains found through Hyrule. Again, these are practical, they make sense, but there's so much more room to experiment with here. People much more creative than I are sure to come up with some crazy inventions, ones that lead to lasting memories because of how they are generated through the player's will. If you can dream it, you can try it, and you can laugh at it. And this emphasis on creativity is felt even more so when wielding the Ultra Hand ability. This allows you to pick up and move objects in the environment while also fusing them onto others. Wheels, gliders, balloons, rocks, and planks of wood will be slung all around and assembled into creations familiar and bizarre. Typically, you'll use Ultra Hand to build vehicles. After all, you know what makes adventuring better? Doing so at breakneck speeds on a rigged up vehicle. Again, I'm more of a function over fashion sort of guy, and so many of my inventions were quite basic, but all it takes is a quick YouTube search to see what people have dreamed up. It's another instance of the developers giving you a tool and letting you be as practical or as chaotic with it as you see fit. If you just want to get to the game, okay, great, you'll never have to do more than the basics. But if you become enthralled in this world, building alone can add dozens of hours as you frantically make your mad scientist schemes into reality. And as I mentioned, there's also the auto build feature, which essentially will take your previous inventions and allow you to make them on the fly. But what really transcends the auto build and the Ultra Hand ability are the Zonai devices. These are what takes those abilities to the next level. Zonai devices are ancient tech created by the Zonai people and can be collected as you play. Beating up on hostile Zonai constructs rewards a material that, when cashed in at these toy capsule vending machines, grants you more Zonai devices. These include vehicles like gliders and blimps, but also propulsion devices like fans, rockets, and stabilizers. There's quite a variety on offer, and these encourage further experimentation and will allow you to build some pretty crazy vehicles. The only downside I ran into with these is that I feel the game doesn't do a great job of explaining how they are powered. Most of them take energy from a battery that you get early in the game, and while there's ways to upgrade it for a bigger charge, I never found out how to do so on my own. Maybe they explained it somewhere in the tutorial, but it all went over my head and kinda got lost in the shuffle, if so. As a result, my vehicles usually didn't have enough juice to be as effective as I had hoped. A simple Google search would fix this, but I wish the game did a better job of explaining it through practice instead of through uncontextualized text dumping. At first, I thought I would genuinely miss the tools offered in Breath of the Wild, but what's on offer here just takes things to a whole new level, almost making Breath of the Wild feel like a prototype. I don't want to undersell how incredible the Ultra Hand ability is, even for someone like me, who lacks the creativity to really go hog wild with it. There was no better feeling than facing a problem and building something to get myself out of that situation, and when it didn't work, it usually led to some funny moments of failure, so it was like a win-win. Besides, if all else fails, your glider remains as trusty as ever. Above all else, if that realistic and tangible sense of adventure is the 1A defining characteristic of Tears, then creativity is like a 1B trait. It's equally as important, but just like exploration, it's up to you to do as much or as little as you'd like. And the result is one of the best sandbox experiences ever created, and one that will endure the test of time. Or at least until the next sequel comes out and blows us away again. Pivoting back to free-form wandering about now, and it truly feels like there's more to unearth here in Tears of the Kingdom compared to Breath of the Wild. Obviously, there's those natural oddities in the landscape that will pull you in, but there's also NPCs wandering about, like this handsome fellow. There's more Korok seeds, in case you weren't traumatized by finding them all last time. There's side quest initiators and village people to talk to. Equally as important would be the long stretches of land without much to find, which might seem like a drag at a glance, but really they aren't. That's because these moments of downtime give the player a brief respite while emphasizing the massive scale of this world. And whenever you're ready for that downtime to end, just whip out some Zonai devices for more crazy fun. Of course, the thing that's going to catch your eye the most out in this world are the shrines, which return from Breath of the Wild. A cool, inviting blue and green swirl pours out of them and lures you in for really sick rewards. Light energy that can be used to upgrade stamina or health, and also really powerful weapons or additional resources to aid you on the path. It makes doing these shrines as soon as you find them almost a non-choice because you know what you'll get out of it will be supremely useful. Honestly, it makes me wish when I went out hiking or kayaking that I'd find one of these tucked away in the woods or the shoreline. I mean, sure, I could use some extra health. Now, I don't have a great memory for any of the shrines found in Breath of the Wild, so I can't speak too much on how they directly compare from that game to this one. They may be on the same page, they might be a little bit better here, they might be a little bit worse. I'm not entirely sure, I think that's going to be subjective. What I do know though is that not every shrine in Tears of the Kingdom hits the mark. First, it's important to know there's a bunch of different types of shrines to uncover. There's your basic puzzle shrines where you have to use materials and your abilities to reach the end. There's combat shrines where you're stripped of your weapons and armor and asked to beat all the constructs without perishing. And there's shrines where the puzzle is actually just opening the shrine. Finding a green gem out in the world and bringing it back to the entrance will crack it like an egg, and usually reward you with a shrine that's as simple as walking up some steps. The point here is that the variety is appreciated and ensures that finding a new shrine rarely feels like a roll your eyes moment. I never found myself saying, oh boy, here we go, another shrine. Nope, it never happened. However, a majority of the shrines are comprised of those basic puzzle ones, where an element or an idea or a mechanic is introduced and then expanded on as you progress further inward. For example, there's this puzzle called Force Transfer at the Ryogak Shrine. The basic premise you're introduced here is to transfer motion using ceramic sticks. To get past the first gate, you simply have to connect the gears to transfer the power. Often, the shrine's name will hint at what you are to do, which is nice, and that's the case here too. Anyway, the next room takes this concept a step further. There are no moving parts to open this gate, but there is a broken lever. In this instance, you must make the leap of logic that you can act as the object in motion. By attaching a lever and manipulating it using Ultra Hand, you can open the gate to reveal another ceramic stick. There's a progression of thought and logic there that many shrines utilize. Introduce the concept, and then build on it by testing the player's understanding of what tools they have available and how they can manipulate the environment in their favor. This is the basic pattern of shrines. However, some will occasionally ask you to take things a step further. Sticking with the Ryogak Shrine, once you have 2 ceramic sticks, you're not done. There's an optional chest you can nab, and these are found in most shrines, by sticking the 2 together and climbing up it. It's an added bonus, and that's great. But to reach the end of the shrine, you'll have to ascend this wall with only 2 platforms on it. I did this shrine early, so it took me a little bit of time to cook up a solution. In the end, I used Ascend to get to the top platform and then climbed up the rest of the way by attaching a ceramic pole. However, and this is part of the beauty, there were more ways that I could have done this. For example, I could have lifted the top platform up using Ultra Hand for a few seconds and then stopped. It would have fell, but then by using Recall on it, it would have gone back up automatically. From there, I could use Ascend to reach the end. Or I could have took a ceramic pole and attached it underneath to prevent it from falling back down, and then using Ascend. There's multiple solutions, and that's great. For as simple as it was, this was one of the best shrines in the game to me, because it made me think on my own and rewarded my ability to take the next logical step. It also gave me freedom in approaching it multiple ways. But like I said, not all shrines are created equal. There were times where a shrine solution seemed to be unfair, such as in Courage to Fall, where you can't complete it without triggering a laser grid, which is something that is usually seen as a setback. There were also ones that just seemed to be too simple, like you didn't have to take that step forward in logic, you just had to repeat a process over again. This is true of Deep Force at Jonsao Shrine, where you simply have to dunk a ball underwater and allow it for it to shoot up to hit a target 3 times in a row. The final step does require one extra move, but overall it was so simple, especially on that second attempt where you're just repeating the steps of the first room Exactly. Then there's Midair Perch at the Ihan A shrine that's embarrassingly simple. Just use the perches to create bridges 3 times, with the last one using motion, and it's really quite obvious that you are to do that. There were a few shrines like this where the ideas were repeated without being pushed far enough, leaving it to feel less like a puzzle and more like following directions. They can't all be winners, I suppose. Still, a lot of them were, and capitalized on unique ideas not found anywhere else in the game. A Jenga-like shrine that I won't spoil here was one of my favorites, despite it also being pretty easy. Perhaps most clever is how shrines are used as fast travel points, meaning they're usually placed next to points of interest that you may want to return to later. That's a brilliant way of incorporating fast travel. Their placement is also clever when it comes to dungeons, called temples this time around. Often you'll have to go on an epic climb or descent to reach these story locations, but along the way, a shrine will be included, one that usually teaches you a useful skill for that upcoming dungeon. That was always a nice way to prepare the player, and so I appreciated it. Overall, the shrines were a bit of a mixed bag. Some good ones, some easy ones, some that were really brainbusters, and others that offered a bit of variety. Alright, it's time to spill the beans on dungeons called temples this time. It's no secret that one of the few criticisms lobbied at Breath of the Wild was its lackluster dungeons that didn't harken back to that tried and true Zelda formula, involving keys, key items, locked doors, puzzles, and a boss. Often, the Divine Beast couldn't stack up to the legendary Zelda dungeons of the past, as for me, Breath of the Wild was my first foray into the series. But despite not having that nostalgia and appreciation for older Zelda games, I could even tell that the Divine Beast just weren't it. So, are things better in tiers? I'd say yes, although they probably still won't stack up to those found in Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, and Link to the Past, amongst others, for more experienced players. There's 5 temples in this game: Wind, Water, Lightning, Fire, and Spirit. Each of these is structured in a similar way. Go to a village, meet the non-Hyrulean people of the land, discover a natural disaster, recruit a companion, set out to find the source of the problem, find and complete the accompanying temple, defeat a boss, and unlock a new companion. That's a gross oversimplification of a process that will take you between 2 to 3 hours each time, making each of these feel like meaty and substantial quests on the path towards your ultimate goal. More on that later, but for now, I want to focus on the quality of the temples. Overall, I enjoyed practically all of them, as each felt unique from one another. All of them involved puzzle solving that usually required a mixture of the 4 skills I mentioned earlier, along with whatever your companion has to offer. For example, in the Fire Temple, the gimmick is riding minecarts to reach higher up levels of the temple. You'll have to use Ultra Hand to move around cards and attach extra boosters to them to reach certain areas. But you'll also be accompanied by Yunobo, a Goron who can launch himself like a cannonball. This is used to clear paths and switch tracks, allowing you to reach new areas. In this case, it's a series of 5 gongs that must be hit with Yunobo to unlock the door to the boss. And pretty much every temple follows this structure. Use abilities and companions to solve puzzles and reach 5 different locks that prevent you from reaching the boss. Careful observation is required if you wish to complete these temples without a guide, as there are moments that will severely test how well you've studied the layout. The Lightning Temple has a required room that was sort of hidden away, unless you notice the tiny flame marking its location. More egregious was this gong in the Fire Temple, where unless you notice this breakable wall way up high, you aren't going to find it. And in the Wind Temple, there's a whole hidden basement level that you won't uncover without a leap of faith and enough endurance to glide to it. Some of these moments represented a real stretch for me, and I imagine those choosing to play blindly will have lost a lot of time to these moments. Again, I'm someone who likes to make progress and get through things, especially since my video recording capacity space is limited. I mean, I can't just have footage of me doing nothing for 47 hours. So, yeah, but for those who are just playing casually, taking time to check everything out might not be an issue. For me though, it was a bit of a nuisance at times when doing these dungeons. Anyway, despite the similar structure of each dungeon, they were all unique enough to stand on their own, equipped with puzzles that usually felt fair and balanced to solve. If I had to rank them, I'd say from best to worst would be lightning, wind, spirit, fire, and water. And the water temple wasn't even that bad, it was just a bit too open and easy to access. Overall, I feel these are distinct improvements over what was found with the Divine Beasts. Of course, that makes for a great jumping off point as we glide our way into a look at the combat system in Tears of the Kingdom. And it remains largely unchanged from Breath of the Wild. Now makes for a good time to get into it because at the end of each temple is a boss fight, and most of them provided an epic encounter even if the fighting itself was less than perfect. Fights with the Gibdo Queen and the final boss, who I won't show just yet, were true challenging encounters. Meanwhile, others like Colgera leaned more into the cinematic epic scale rather than offering a challenging fight. And to be clear, I don't think it was a bad thing, it felt like a really cool fight. These, along with Muktarok, were the best fights in the game because they felt either unique, challenging, or at least epically scaled. The two remaining fights were so-so, a mirror match with the Seized Construct, and by far the most forgettable, your fight against this big rock crab. I can't even remember its name. Here, I'll look it up quick, give me a minute. Marbled Goma? Yeah, Marbled Goma. That fight was a joke. You could just spam Yunobo's ability, which allowed you to essentially stun lock it to death. That one needed more time, but the rest ranged from average to great. I enjoyed them as the cherries on top of solid dungeon design. Now, while playing Breath of the Wild, I noticed 3 problems with combat: enemy variety, weapon durability, and the overpowered flurry rush. 2 of those problems have been solved here in Tears. Enemy variety is no longer an issue, as all those Lizalfos, Moblins, Hinoxes, and Bokoblins return here, but there's a whole host of other inclusions this time around. Sticking to that theme, there's boss Bokoblins that will escort a small group of minions around. And there's also cave-dwelling Horoblins, I think that's how you say it, Horoblins, who can go anti-grav on you and just crawl around on the ceilings to snipe you from above. You'll find them in pretty much every cave. Another creature you'll find in caves are these like-likes. They're like weird tentacle creatures who want desperately to eat you, or at the very least kill you. Their only weakness is a ball in their mouth, and when that's shot, it will allow you to get in massive damage. Besides this, there's new mini-bosses to find. I about cried of horror the first time I saw this silhouette of a massive Frox just moving through the darkness of the depths. And accidentally stumbling into a fight with a Gleeox felt like David versus Goliath, except this time Goliath won, and he won wholeheartedly. So suffice it to say, enemy variety, including that of mini-bosses, has been greatly expanded on for the betterment of the experience. Upon hearing that weapon durability would return in Tears, a collected sigh was let out by many a gamer, myself included. Hoarding all of my best weapons became the norm in Breath, scared to use them out of fear of needing something strong later on. It was a divisive system to say the least. Many disliked it, while others did defend it. So what would Nintendo do in the sequel? Well, make both sides happy, of course, using a bit of that patent Nintendo magic. Remember the fuse ability? Well, the beauty is that enemies, particularly stronger ones, will drop materials that can be fused to any basic weapon, like a stick or a sword or a club, to gain an insane attack power bonus. I'm talking buffs of like plus 25 to plus 40 depending on what you equip. It means that using up a cool weapon doesn't feel nearly as bad because you're a single glue job away from making something that is just as powerful. And when you add that craziness factor of fusing something to a weapon that doesn't belong on a weapon, it just makes the system all the more fun to try out. Nintendo addressed the criticism by adding something instead of taking a system away, and it's honestly quite brilliant. I never sighed when a weapon broke because tapping a flame emitter to a wooden stick or a Lizalfos horn to a club did the trick just fine. However, the one problem Tears of the Kingdom doesn't quite solve is how broken Flurry Rush is. A gracious dodge window allows you to leap into the air to slow time and then absolutely punish an enemy's health bar without the possibility of them striking back, for as long as the rush lasts. In straight up fights, these can be abused after a bit of practice learning an enemy's moves. Considering tougher enemies don't swap up movesets, but instead just buff their health and damage, you can practice on like lower level bokoblins who can't hurt you much, and then apply that knowledge to the highest ranking ones to cheese them. It can make combat a serious joke if you're willing to take the brief amount of time to learn enemy movesets and practice a bit, and I do think that's a bit of a letdown. Now, for me personally, I didn't practice enough to pull it off consistently, but it would not have been hard to do so if I even felt the slightest bit compelled. But despite the attempts to address these issues, or the failure to do so in the case of the Flurry Rush, to be honest, like I just alluded to, I didn't want to fight much of anything in this game. I rarely sought out fights with enemies because my preferred playstyle leaned more into exploration and puzzle solving rather than fighting. I mean, if you're out on the trail hiking, you'd probably much rather check out both forks in the road than, say, I don't know, fight a wolf or something. That's just me though, I mean, that's how I feel. The other thing was that sometimes questionable hitboxes would sway me away from combat, especially in some of the boss fights, like the Gibdo Queen. As a result, there were a lot of times where I'd see an enemy fort in the distance, and I'd think, you know what, it's just not worth it, I'm just gonna go right past it. I mean, might as well, right? Let them live their lives, because that blood moon is just gonna bring them back anyway. Part of the problem here is that the choice to engage with combat never felt as rewarding as continuing to explore and gain valuable items out of shrines. Beating an entire camp of enemies, using up resources and weapons in the process just to pick up some small scraps of food or a few arrows just didn't feel worth the cost, especially factoring in time. Combat isn't incentivized or rewarded enough, and so, final boss spoilers here, when it came time to face Ganondorf in a final challenging showdown, I didn't really feel prepared at all. I got my butt beat for a good hour and a half before I managed to break through, and part of that was through cheesing. Or at least I think it was because of cheesing. I mean, my Flurry Rush wouldn't work on him because then he'd Flurry Rush me, so I just resorted to shooting him with arrows. I don't know if that was what you were supposed to do in this phase of the fight, but it worked. So the point here is that I just didn't feel the game did a good enough job of preparing me for this encounter. Combat was just kind of weak. And this apprehension towards that system even endured upon unlocking the spirit companions after completing each temple. That's right, you get friends in this game. Yunobo, the Goron I mentioned earlier, is a wrecking ball. Tulin, a Rito, will shoot arrows and provides a gust of wind to carry you. Sidon of the Zora gives you a water bubble shield. Riju of the Gerudo creates an electric field that, when struck with an arrow, does massive lightning damage to nearby enemies. And Minoru is literally a mech. Equip whatever you find to her and let her go to town. They aid you in combat, which feels like it evens the odds when charging into a camp, but tracking them down to manually activate their abilities in a fight really can be a slog. They kind of get lost in the shuffle of all the other spirits, or they will dart away from you as soon as you try to activate them. Still, they can distract and clear out foes over time, so I can't complain about their help. And when I was just out exploring, they did provide a bit of companionship, tying into the themes of loyalty and friendship found throughout the story. While looking at adventuring, exploration, shrines, temples, and combat, there's one topic that I've been dancing around: quest design. Much like it was in Breath of the Wild, quests in tiers are completed at your leisure and are mostly optional. The opening objective of Destroy Ganon is replaced this time with Find Zelda. Again, more on that later. Besides this overall objective, there's only a handful of main quests within the game, and some are strung together to form quest lines. To be fair though, despite the tagline of main quests, these are ultimately just a suggestion. If you want an easier time reaching and defeating Ganondorf, then it's a good idea to complete the 5 temples and locate the Master Sword before heading to the deepest part of the depths. However, it is all optional. Again, the only thing you must do to see the credits roll is finish the tutorial and defeat Ganondorf. Everything else is technically optional, just like it was in the prequel. But to play the game this way is to miss the purpose of the adventure. Yet, it's still admirable that this option is available for those brave enough to pursue it. Imagine having the confidence yet again to give your players this level of freedom, trusting them to see it all on their first run, but giving them the option to skip it all the next time around. Incredible. But really, this approach to quest design is another factor that feeds into that sense of discovery and adventure. If you want to go to the Rito village, or find all the dragon tears, or explore the depths, or just go right to Ganondorf, you are free to do so. It's ultimately your choice, and you are rewarded for doing anything really. The amount of player choice makes other games look like a guided tour, while Tears meanwhile feels like an adventure of your own free will. Do whatever you want, Nintendo doesn't care, and there's really something beautiful about that. Giving the player the agency to choose when their adventurous spirit needs a rest, and determining for themselves how much Hyrule is too much Hyrule. Push the main story if you want, but always remember there's always more to be seen across the multiple maps. It so well mirrors our real world. Exploring and learning about a new place or a new biome is fascinating so long as we can do it on our terms and can return to what we know when we've had enough. And that's how Tears of the Kingdom feels. The game never grabs you by the hand and pulls you off in any direction. Quest markers are occasionally used, but they never give you the full picture of what to do, where to go, and how exactly to progress. There's hints and dialogue to point you in the right direction, and it's up to you to carve that path for yourself, with an online internet walkthrough always lingering if so needed. The spirit of that idea is felt best in the entire quest line leading up to the final dungeon, the Spirit one. To find that Spirit dungeon, your best bet is to follow the associated quest, but it uses puzzles and riddles to guide you. You'll have to locate where the quest begins, find some hidden ancient text twice, find a nearby armor set, and then complete another puzzle. And this unlocks a sanctuary in the sky with more puzzles and platforming before you finally come face to face with a mask. It points the way forward to your next objective, so you build an airplane, strap on that mask using Ultra Hand, and then fly back down to the surface. From there, you travel deep underground where the Spirit Temple awaits after more puzzle-solving goodness. It's like a 3-hour quest line that hardly ever tells you exactly where to go, instead trusting the strength of its own built-in hints and approach to design to guide you naturally. And for the most part, it just works. Whether it's spur-of-the-moment exploration for exploration's sake, or attempts to tackle the main story, your agency over the adventure is always put at the forefront, making for a brilliant experience once more. My only real complaint towards the exploration itself is how important things in the world are sometimes gatekept by tedium or puzzles where I don't think puzzles were needed. The Skyview Towers are a brilliant inclusion. They launch you high up, allowing you to access Sky Islands or to glide to other parts of Hyrule, or even to plunge into a new chasm. Meanwhile, visiting one will unlock a portion of the map. I mentioned this in my Elden Ring review, but I'm not a fan of when games hide the map away from you and force you to find it piece by piece. However, I prefer the approach here much more than I did in Elden Ring. The looming towers make it very easy to tell where you're to go in each region if you want to get the map before doing everything within it. I'm not a fan of the idea that each tower is its own puzzle. Some will require you to ascend into them from below, or glide in from above, or find an NPC to help, or some other trivial task that slows down the exploration. I'm in a new area. I want to start putting imagery to my map through exploration. I don't want to waste my time building a big bridge just to reach the tower. In the same vein, acquiring armor upgrades from Great Fairies also felt like a slog. Because of Ganondorf's meddling, the fairies have hidden themselves away, and in order to use their services, you'll have to get a local band to play music for them. However, the band has disbanded? With its members being all over Hyrule. Each fairy has a particular musician they want to hear, so oftentimes you'll have to track down where they are, and good luck doing that without a guide. Then you'll have to complete a quest for them, like collecting 10 fireflies at nighttime, which is boring. From there, you'll go back to the Great Fairy, find a way to get the band's broken cart to it, and then finally, she will emerge. And then, after all that, you realize you don't have enough materials or rupees to secure the single upgrade per item that you're granted at each fairy. So then, you grind for that, and finally, your armor gets +2. With 3 armor pieces, that's +6. A ton of work and time for 6 defense points. I was not a fan of this by any stretch. It just felt tedious. If I have the materials, let me upgrade my stuff. Don't make me do a whole quest line for perks and bonuses that I'm gonna need. Okay, let's pivot into a look at the game's story. Breath of the Wild's narrative bored me because I rarely salt the story out. That's my own fault, but I wanted more this time around, so just like with exploration, I took things into my own hands. And what I found was pretty good, albeit quite simple, but with enough interesting characters and a decent layer of mystery throughout. The events kick off with Link and Zelda exploring some ancient ruins below Hyrule Castle where Zonai hieroglyphics await them. The Zonai are an ancient group of godlike beings who descended from the heavens. In meeting the Hyruleans, their king, Rauru, fell in love with a woman named Sonia, and this brought the two kingdoms together. The ruins also show images of a great war where Rauru, Sonia, and those loyal to the kingdom waged war against an evil demon king many years ago. Progressing further down into the ruins, Link and Zelda come face to face with a mummified corpse being suppressed by a blue hand. A mysterious stone falls from the hand, and as Zelda examines it, the corpse comes back to life in a tremendous display of power. Link shields Zelda from the blast, but in doing so, is wounded as the corruption shatters the Master's sword, depleting his health and stamina in an instant. God of War sequels, anybody? Soon, the corrupted mummy shows off a portion of his power by pushing all of Hyrule Castle back into the sky, triggering an event called the Upheaval. It's crazy. The mighty quake creates a hole in the earth and Zelda plummets into it, unable to be saved by Link. The mysterious hand from earlier then rescues Link, pulling him to safety and fixing his broken arm. Beaten and bruised, Link awakens to find Zelda missing, and a mysterious voice calls for him to visit the Temple of Time. Stepping outside, Link realizes he's been transported miles up into the sky, housed in what is likely an ancient Zonai temple. A while later, he meets up with a ghostly apparition named Rauru. Those with a keen eye will recognize this name as the one the mummy referenced earlier. He tasks Link with accessing the temple, but in order to do so, he'll have to visit shrines and collect their light to bring his new arm powers back to full strength. This kicks off the game's tutorial, which is once again super innovative and helpful in preparing you for the journey ahead. After completing it, Rauru tells Link that he has done all he can to help him and Zelda, and leaves it up to the swordsman to defeat the Demon King, restore Hyrule to peace, and of course, track down the princess. And from there, you're set free to begin doing just that. Just like in Breath of the Wild, after setting things up, you're free to engage with the story as much or as little as you'd like. Scattered throughout Hyrule this time are geoglyphs. They're hard to miss, especially with how much time you'll spend gliding around in the sky. Housed in each of these is a pattern in the shape of a tear. Reaching that point will unlock a cutscene that provides clues on the location of Princess Zelda. Since exploration is player-driven, these cutscenes will be unlocked in a miscellaneous order, unlocking them as you stumble into them. However, at any time, you can go into the menus and watch them in the intended order. 11 of the 18 major cutscenes are locked behind this method, but anyone who takes the time to explore Hyrule thoroughly will have no trouble finding them all. The rest of the cutscenes unlock as you progress the main story, inching closer to your fight with Ganondorf. Ultimately, I enjoyed the story found here, and that's because of its unconventional approach to telling one. Within the context of the story, finding cutscenes through interacting with these pools of water makes sense. That's because, and major spoilers here, skip ahead to this timestamp if you don't want to be spoiled. When Zelda falls backwards into the pit, she uses that secret stone to be transported back in time. Here, she meets up with Rauru and Sonia along with the regional champions. She witnesses the ascension of the Demon King and bits of the imprisoning war. She even comes to see how Rauru sacrificed himself to freeze Ganondorf in time unto an era where a lone swordsman could defeat him. Early in the game, Link loses the Master Sword backwards in time too. Zelda retrieves it and knows that Link won't be able to win in the future without the sword. In its beaten and broken shape, it'll need major repairs. Zelda knows there's only one thing to do, so she consumes that secret stone, which the secret stones are a Zonai technology that pretty much enhance the wielder's power drastically. But it's said that if you consume them, then you get transformed into an immortal dragon. And so that's what she does. And then from there she spends years and years flying around until the time when Link is around. Like, how cool is that? She gets sent back in time, becomes a dragon, and then flies around Hyrule waiting until the future. Like, that's just really cool. And when she transforms into one, she lets out 11 tears containing those memories of what she's seen in the past, so that Link can better be informed on the fight to come by finding them in the future. I just thought it was a really cool way to tell a story. It seems like most Zelda stories boil down to good overcoming evil through bravery and courage, and while that's true again here, the structure of the story makes it much more interesting as you peel back the layers of mystery to uncover something pretty good. On top of that, the new characters are great. Rauru proves himself immediately as an incredibly well-realized character. He steals every scene he's in with his steadfast stoicism and propensity for leadership. Through his words alone, you can see how the people of Hyrule would have fallen in line with him under their own volition. His personality allows you to buy in on the entire story, so well done, especially to the voice actor. Another standout character, even for as brief as an appearance as she makes, would be Yona. She's a strong woman, the head healer of the Zoro domain, and the lover of Sidon. She's the one who gets his head on straight about the conflict he feels for leaving the domain to aid Link. A great character, and the game is chock full of more that you can find on your own. Now, my only complaint with the story would be in what comes after defeating the bosses at each temple. Since you can complete them in any order, the cutscenes shown after can't be structured to follow a linear path. And as a result, they opted to keep all of these cutscenes extremely similar, even going so far as to have repeated dialogue. It's sort of a drag. Every time they show a young companion from each clan, the Rito, the Zora, the Gorons, and the Gerudos, you see each of the young champions receiving a secret stone that's been passed on from the ancestors, along with a flashback showing how they couldn't stand up to Ganondorf in the past. With this knowledge passed on, they plead with their descendants to take up arms against the Demon King by aiding Link in his journey, to which they all of course happily oblige. The first time seeing this cutscene was pretty cool, but the following 3 times, sitting through it was a slog, especially because they do go on for some time. The game has no problem being slow with its delivery, and it's felt most here. That was my one complaint though. Besides this, I really enjoyed the story being told here. Nothing too deep, but it capitalized on its structure and characters quite well. Alright, let's bring things home with a discussion of the presentation and performance. Right up front, it's important to acknowledge that this game is a technical marvel solely for what it's able to do using the hardware that's available. Transitioning from open areas above the clouds to a massive surface land to a deep underground chasm without conventional loading screens is already impressive. Doing it on 5 to 7 year old technology, no more powerful than an iPad, makes it jaw-dropping. Truly something special. Considering the technology available, this game has no right to run and perform as well as it does, but it is still worth pointing out a few of those flaws for fairness' sake. Before that though, let's also highlight just how impactful a strong sense of art direction can be, and how pivoting towards that instead of hyperrealism can lead to a game overcoming that graphical fidelity pitfall. Tears of the Kingdom's art style takes what was already great about Breath of the Wild and just delivers more of it, weaving in a few brighter colors in the process. The simplicity of NPC designs, the raw beauty of the simulated nature, and the gentle liveliness of the world just makes for something special. You look at other games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, whose art direction didn't quite stick the landing for most, and you're more likely to notice the shortcomings. Here though, everything feels so uniform that berating the game for not having super detailed textures just feels like you're missing the point. With that being said, some will remain unhappy with the 30 FPS lock, but I think much of that comes down to expectation. When I play a game on my current generation PS5 or Xbox, I come to expect the higher frame rates because of the capability of the hardware. It would be sort of idiotic to expect the same thing from hardware this old with a game as large as this one. So it never really quite became an issue for me. I can understand why some would be disappointed, but it seems to me that this was inevitable, and it rarely pulled me out of the experience. I mean, there were a few times where the frame rate did tank, particularly in Kakariko Village, but this was quite rare honestly, a few moments out of a 60-hour experience. In terms of music, I think this is another slam dunk soundtrack. Each theme did a great job of accentuating the moment it was a part of without undercutting the action or mood. In particular, the title theme's reference to Breath of the Wild's opening theme put a smile on my face. Just another great OST. In terms of presentation, the biggest problem that stood out to me was button mapping, as I can't tell you how many times I accidentally triggered a menu or an ability that I didn't intend to. There were times when I would go to switch from one ability to the next, but the directional nature of the inputs just wouldn't make the switch. It was if I didn't move the analog stick enough or point it in the exact right direction. Also, when building using Ultra Hand, it was awkward to maneuver items around, particularly when trying to rotate something. I wish the game had an auto level button where it would just flatten out whatever you were holding, instead of having to twist it around each time. Very rarely do you want items to be placed on an angle, and so a button to automatically force a straightening would have been greatly appreciated. Besides these though, there were just a lot of instances of meaning to bring up the map or the menu and accidentally accessing something else. Not sure if this is entirely the game's fault, or if it's my fault, or it's a joint fault, but it was certainly enough to cause some annoyance while playing. At the end of the day, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is a game about adventure and the thrill of uncovering somewhere new or old, natural or man-made, or just how something has changed over time. By not piling on map markers and quest objectives, the game reminds us of how we are meant to explore places naturally, without a checklist or set goal, but instead to just soak in the beauty of what we're experiencing. It's a lesson to be adapted into our everyday lives, appreciating the joy of discovering adventure. Simultaneously, creativity is emphasized too, much more so than in the predecessor. A new set of tools allows you to cook up anything you want, whether it's a vehicle, weapon, or some other odd contraption. Beyond that though is a new benchmark in open world design, one that betters what was already considered one of the best games of all time. By prioritizing player freedom, the game ensures that you will get out of it what you put into it. Explore to your heart's content. Solve puzzle shrines for meaningful rewards that fuel your adventure. Use on-the-fly building mechanics to create incredible devices. Meet companions to aid your journey after enriching their lives. And never forget the lingering evil of the world. Save Hyrule, but do so when you're ready to. It's brilliant. By transforming my perspective on how to go about playing this game, I found myself enjoying Tears of the Kingdom much more than my closed-minded romp through Breath of the Wild. And as a result, I discovered something incredible. The thrill of adventure. Thanks for watching. Alright guys, thank you so much for checking out this lengthy look at The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. This video came out a bit later than I was initially planning, but a nasty stomach bug pushed things back a bit, so I really do appreciate your patience. And I also appreciate you putting up with my voice in this video. As you can tell, it's pretty hoarse, especially right now at the end of this recording session. Yeah, when I had that stomach bug, you can guess what comes along with that. It wasn't pretty. And as a result of losing my gut so many times, I also lost my voice. But I wanted to push through this. I wanted to get this video done, so I'm glad it's up now. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was worth the sacrifice. As for upcoming videos, it'll probably be a while to the next release, with most likely a look at Final Fantasy XVI. At some point later this summer, I also want to make a video on Diablo 4. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw I was really tempted to get it. Well, I caved, and I'm like 5 or 6 hours in, and I'm really enjoying it. So, yeah, you can look forward to videos on that too. And eventually Starfield, Lies of P, Spider-Man 2, and, you know, other stuff throughout the year. As always, I appreciate your continued support, and would love to hear what you think about Tears of the Kingdom in the comments below. I know there's tons of people who still haven't finished it yet, so be sure to let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, join our Discord, the link is below, and as always guys, have a nice day, and take care.